It's Friday, the 1st of September, 2023.
The last word in podcasting news. This is the Podnews Weekly Review with James Cridland and Sam Sethi.
I'm James Cridland, the editor of Podnews.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the CEO of Podfans.
In the chapters today, YouTube to support RSS finally, but not fully. Spotify adds more proprietary new features for podcasters. Apple launches enhanced analytics for paid subscriptions. And the World Series of Important Americans in Podcasting is announced. I like what you've done there, Sam. Plus...
Hi, I'm Nathan Gathright from transcribe.fm, and I'll be on later to talk about transcripts and Lightning payment APIs.
He will. This podcast is sponsored and hosted by Buzzsprout. Last week, 3,201 people started a podcast with Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy with powerful tools and remarkable customer support, and now AI to help you publish your show. And by Podnews Live in London this September. Tickets are at podnews.net/live.
From your daily newsletter, the Podnews Weekly Review.
Well, welcome back, James, first of all. That's what I should say.
Oh, it's a great pleasure to be back, let me tell you.
Yeah, the globetrotter himself. Now, look, while you were away, we'll find out what happened over in Colorado later on in this show. But one of the stories that broke, obviously you were there when it broke. YouTube says it will support RSS finally. But let's be honest, it's not fully supporting RSS, is it?
Well, there's two things that they're doing with RSS. One of the things that they're doing is RSS ingestion. So that means that they will look at your RSS feed. When you publish a new episode, it will automatically upload it to the YouTube system. So no DAI, no dynamic audio insertion like you can do with Buzzsprout, none of that stuff. But it will at least support RSS as a method of getting into YouTube, which will be a good thing, perhaps. That was something that we reported on in May, but it's the first time that actually YouTube has said that they're actually doing that, which is a thing. So that's one side of the RSS that they're using. The other side, which is slightly more interesting, is actually something that they didn't mention on the day, but they mentioned to me when I was having a chat with them. And that's that the YouTube Music app will support RSS natively, so proper, pass-through RSS. So the YouTube Music app is actually going to be a podcast app, rather bizarrely. So there's a thing.
Well, that's interesting. But my question is, what version of RSS will they support? I bet it won't be the podcast namespace.
I bet it probably won't. My suspicion is, they don't necessarily need it, I don't suppose. But I don't know. It'll be interesting to see quite what they are supporting in terms of the RSS ingest.
I was listening to Rob Greenlee last night talking about why there's this debate about YouTube and is it not a proper podcast if it doesn't have RSS? Well, okay, so you're saying YouTube will have RSS. But my point is, it's only the bare minimum RSS that they want to import, which means things like, the comments that you have in YouTube won't be standard comments. The chapter art won't be. And so it fundamentally is another one of the, what I would call proprietary platforms. Spotify did this. They supported they supported RSS for a while, ingested what they wanted, and then when they've got what they want, they turn off the pipe, and then it's back to the old ways and more proprietary technology. And I suspect, and I hope I'd be proved wrong, but I suspect YouTube will do exactly the same thing.
Yeah, maybe. What we can see is a few ingestions of RSS that they're currently running. CNN One Thing is one of those, and that looks like a relatively standard YouTube-hosted video with a static graphic on it. And it doesn't appear to have any episode art. But then CNN One Thing doesn't have any episode art anyway, and nor does it appear to have any support for chapters, but then CNN One Thing doesn't have any support for chapters anyway. So we're a little bit sort of in the dark as to which bits that it actually supports. But, I guess we'll begin to learn a little bit more about that when they get a little bit closer towards launching this thing.
My worry is that, and this is one of the things that I'd love to get more support for, I think people talk about RSS in the generic, all right? And we don't talk about specific versions of RSS anymore. And this worries me because for this standard person in the street who goes, oh, it's a podcast, it's YouTube, it's the same thing. And even more so now, oh, yes, and it does RSS. But it doesn't do full RSS. And that's where I think, well, I know you talked about the podcast standards project on the show with Todd and Rob. And again, it's something that I think needs to happen, but there needs to be versioning for the namespace as well. Which version of RSS? I mean, I talk about RSS 2.06, right? It's the phase 6 version of RSS. We've got to find a way to delimit between what the open standards groups do, people like Fountain, Podverse, all the hosts, and what Spotify, Apple, and Google, in this case, YouTube, are doing, because otherwise we're talking RSS. It's not the same. We're not talking apples and oranges, right? When we talk about RSS, and I go back to my days in Netscape, and when we were, battling with Microsoft, it was, we support this version of HTML 3.1, 3.2, and they support 2.x. And that gave the user some form of understanding that there was a difference. They didn't need to know the technical difference between the features in HTML, but they did need to know that there was a number difference. I think we're failing when we don't start to put a number difference into what the namespace is doing, and that's one of my big bugbears, really.
Yeah, I think the difficulty with that is that not every single podcast hosting company, not every single podcast app supports every single feature in the new podcast namespace. And I think that that's going to be a particular issue. There are some ideas in the new podcast namespace which are probably mistakes, and we probably shouldn't have actually done them. There are some that simply nobody supports, the fast follow idea, all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's a little bit harder saying, we support RSS namespace phase 6 and everything in it, because it's going to be very unlikely, apart from PodFans, that everybody supports every single tag, I suppose. But yes, I would certainly agree that it would certainly make sense if you had a bit more of an understanding of which bits were supported by who. That was part of the whole RSS thing was part of the announcement. The other part of the announcement was that podcasts are on track to complete a global rollout by the end of the year. I was tipped the wink that Australia may be next in terms of support, so that's nice.
They're favouring you, James. That's all it is.
Yeah, that may be it. A podcast section on the website, and of course support in the YouTube Music app. The country is also planning additional analytics for podcasts. They didn't say quite what. And also improved discovery. And the one thing that Steve McClendon did say is, if your podcast is on YouTube, make sure that you have checked the little box that says that this is a podcast, because you'll actually get into more places as a result if you do that. So that's a useful hint and tip. And already companies are integrating with YouTube's analytics. So Triton Digital, for example, is doing a very interesting thing where they are actually going to be using YouTube analytics as part of Triton podcast metrics. So your views on YouTube will count for Triton podcast metrics, which is an interesting departure for that particular company. And I'll be talking to Stephanie Donovan from YouTube in the Podcast Business Journal in a couple of weeks as well. So hopefully find out a little bit more about that too.
Let's move on, James, to some other news. Apple have launched enhanced analytics for paid subscriptions. I'm going to go and make a cup of tea while you tell me what Apple's done, because I'm not that interested.
Well, all that I'll tell you is that they've actually launched what they should have launched a year ago. Apple's paid subscriptions was all very well, but actually the only way to find out whether or not you had actually sold any of these things was to download a spreadsheet, literally a spreadsheet. In fact, it wasn't even a spreadsheet. It was a .text file, which you then had to rename to TSV in order for you to actually view it in a spreadsheet. So yes, they now have all of the pretty analytics that you would expect them to have launched a year ago when they launched paid subscriptions. So they've done that. They've also announced more delegated delivery partners, which will allow you to upload premium content directly to Apple Podcasts. Podbean is the first of those to go live, and there'll be a few more of those. So there you go.
Okay, some more interesting stuff then. Apple has integrated with a company called Linkfire, a new podcast linking service. Tell me more, James.
Well, so Linkfire is one of the many different Magic Link podcasting services out there which allow you to share your podcast and all of the places where it is with just one page. So a bit weird that Apple have partnered up with this company. I don't quite understand why. And certainly I asked them, what happens if you visit one of these pages with an Android phone? Will Apple Podcasts still be at the top? And the bloke said yes.
What?
So that seems a little bit pointless. Unless, of course, that means that the Apple Podcasts Android app is on its way. The interesting thing, though, is that if you use Linkfire, you get access to Apple Podcasts Analytics within your Linkfire dashboard. So it's the first time that Apple Podcast Analytics have been available on a third-party service. I did ask Apple, does this mean that Apple Podcast Analytics now has an open API? And I got a rather sort of embarrassed shuffle of an answer. So I don't know why Linkfire have been chosen as a special company for this. I don't know what they had to do in order to actually get access to Apple Podcasts Analytics, nor do I understand quite why Apple has promoted them so heavily. It all seems a little bit confusing from my point of view, but you know, if Apple want to do deals with random companies, then that's up to Apple, I guess.
Did anyone say acquisition in the pipeline? Oh, sorry. Did they say that publicly? Yes. I suspect it will be.
Yes, perhaps. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why the company's getting very excited. I mean, I have to say, one of the things that is interesting is that, of course, this Linkfire page will also link to your podcast on Spotify and on YouTube, perhaps, and even perhaps on Podfans, because you can write in any old link if you want to. So that's, I think, interesting. But I don't fully understand, as I say, quite why Apple have jumped into bed with this company. They don't seem to be doing anything particularly interesting, although they are doing the same sort of job for music. So if you want to link to a song that you really like, you can use Linkfire for that. And that will then allow you to play that song in Apple Music or in YouTube Music or in Spotify or various other places. So perhaps that was the reason why they were chosen. I don't know.
Friend of the show, Dan Meisner from Bumper, told you a few things about this, what he thought about it. What was his view?
Yeah, I mean, he says that it's exciting in terms of at least we'll get beyond downloads and we'll actually understand verified consumption and true audience growth, which is what Apple Podcasts Analytics does. Certainly, I'm seeing a big difference between what Apple Podcasts Analytics is telling you and what Apple Podcasts is actually downloading. And if you were to compare the Apple Podcasts dashboard with your own podcast host, I suspect that you would find wildly different numbers. And I'm actually quite interested to see whether or not there is a piece of work that I can do to try and persuade people to punch in those individual numbers so that we can actually compare like for like there and see quite how many downloads are being made by Apple Podcasts that aren't getting played. But perhaps that's a different story later in the year. Let's just take a quick break.
I threw away a successful business to teach people AI. My name's Jordan Wilson, and I'm the host of the Everyday AI podcast, a daily show helping you learn and leverage artificial intelligence. I used to work with big brands like Nike and Jordan Brand, and then started a successful digital agency. So why am I throwing it all away? Because everyone needs to learn AI to not get left behind. You can spend 20 hours a week learning AI on your own, or spend 20 minutes with me daily on the Everyday AI podcast. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or on everydayaipodcast.com. Let's learn together.
Didn't we have that as a bug? No, sorry, a feature earlier in the year.
We had that as a bug last year, yes.
Sorry.
And we decided that around 31% of downloads on Apple Podcasts are simply not actually played, although Apple are very upset at me for saying that. So there you go.
Well, I'm with Dan Meisner. A focus on listen time, percent completed and value paid would be much better metrics than downloads. But anyway, we will leave Apple to do what they do. James, I don't know if you saw this while you were out at Podcast Movement, but the Hollywood Reporter has announced the 40 most powerful people in podcasting, or as I call it, the World Series of 40 Important Americans in Podcasting. Because guess what? There were no people outside the United States on their top 40.
They did not know. There was very few people outside of North America in that list. And actually, iHeart's very own Podcast News Daily, or whatever it's called, apparently it's a daily newsletter for podcasting. They also released their most powerful people in podcasting list, and I went through that this afternoon, and I was counting all of the people that weren't based in North America, and that was a big fat zero as well. So it's good to know that both of these American organizations don't believe that there's anything going on in podcasting in the rest of the world. It's all a little bit sad, really, but still, that's the myopic Americans, I guess, or certainly the myopic journalists there.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a LinkedIn post and got some great feedback. I mean, I said, look, how about you? Jack Davenport, Dina Sophos, Morten Strungun, Alberto Bertelli. I then said, look, if you just want to stick to Americans, how about Adam Curry, Dave Jones? I mean, the list was awful. It was just sort of the people we happen to once talk to who might be advertising in our publication. That's who we're going to list in this. And that's such an old trick from publications in the day. I remember, you would get these lists and it would be, well, why are they getting an award, or why are they on that list? Oh, yeah, they took advertising out. I remember. Right. Okay, great.
Yeah. Well, the iHeart list was even funnier because it had, many big executives from iHeart Media, weirdly, in that list. They also had some of the talent that has signed up to iHeart, and it was what I thought about the iHeart one, which I thought was quite funny, is that they have made that alphabetical. Because for the first couple of years of them publishing that, they made it, this is the most powerful person, and the most powerful person was always Conal Byrne from iHeart Media. It was always him because, of course, what was an iHeart publication going to
make sure the boss is on there?
Yeah, exactly. By the way, a company that actually hides the fact that it's owned by iHeart. So yeah, I think it's all a little bit lazy, and bless them. But there is more to podcasting than just the USA.
Hey, look, maybe, James, you and I should do a list and see what we've come up with. I don't know. Let's see.
Yeah. Let's no.
Oh, go on. It'd be fun to just see who we cross off the list. That'd be even funnier.
That would be funny. So yes, one of the most powerful people in podcasting last year was Dawn Ostroff, no longer, but also working with her, Spotify's director of podcast product, Austin Lemon, I think is how you pronounce his name. Anyway, he was also at Podcast Movement, announcing a number of enhancements and features for Spotify as well.
Yeah, they talked about show page customization, creator controls for podcast previews, and a rollout of automated ads. So I had a look at it. I think, after you published it on Podnews Daily, and I looked at it and I went, okay, that's fine. That's updating their ad stuff. That's that. Okay. And then I looked at the show page customization, and fundamentally it's just more proprietary mechanisms. So they've done the pod roll. Okay. They've come up with a pod roll in their own special way. And that's one of the core features on show page customization. I sort of rolled my eyes, go, Why? Why are you doing this?
I think I've worked out what Spotify's plan is these days. They are going to support the bare minimum in terms of RSS. Both in and out. So if you host with Spotify, they'll support the bare minimum. If you are an RSS podcast elsewhere, then they will support the bare minimum, and that is it. And what their plan is to then add a load of additional Spotify-only features, so that they can basically have their cake and eat it. They can make their shows available everywhere. But if you want the video version, for example, of those shows, the only place that you will see it is on Spotify. And there are plenty of other examples of that, I think. So I think that's basically what I've worked out there, that the plan is that, the bare minimum in terms of RSS, and then all of these additional features will be a proprietary thing just for Spotify, which, to be fair, is also the game that Apple Podcasts has been playing recently as well. So, interesting to see them launching a bunch of additional things, especially automated ads to more countries, because I think that they are feeling the heat from YouTube, which, of course, is available in every single country on Earth in terms of payout. But I think that's where their heads are at there.
How did those proprietary Spotify polls go? Anyone using them?
I recently worked out that you can turn them off, so I turned them off. I'm sure...
Has anyone worked out how to turn them on even use them?
Well, that's the funny thing, because they were turned on automatically, which I always thought was quite funny. That they basically, they turned on the whole thing completely automatically, and was asking, what did you think of this episode? Good, bad. So, I don't know. But, it's probably a plan from Spotify. And let's face it, they need a plan. There's been a bunch of research which has shown how many people are using Spotify since 2017 in terms of audience share, and not very many people are actually using Spotify in terms of ad supported. That figure hasn't really increased over the last 5 or 6 years. So perhaps Spotify does need to end up doing something there. Yeah,
I mean, they've seen a growth in active users, monthly active users, which is good. I mean, they're subscribers, paid subscribers. So, well done to Spotify there. But as you said, the non-paying Spotify users who would use the platform is flatlined totally. So, I wonder what the Joe Rogan effect was. Do you think their bet was that people would come across and pay, or people come across and just use? Which was it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if their bet was people will come across and then turn into paying customers, then perhaps that's been a good plan, because, as you so rightly say, that has done very well. It's more than doubled in terms of audience, but there's really been no change in terms of ad-supported audience share at all. And again, I think it's different. It is you're comparing monthly active users with time spent listening, and in this particular case, time spent listening is not increasing in terms of ad-supported audience at all. And whenever you have a look at Spotify's time spent listening numbers, they don't do very well. They don't do very well in terms of time spent listening to podcasts overall. So, perhaps there is something there to have a look at in terms of the different numbers that we see coming out of the big green monster.
It's really, actually, when you say that, it's really weird, because I've had Spotify, like many people, for years now, and I pay this subscription. But I do that for the family in order to have music. And I have it in the car and everywhere else. But I never, ever use Spotify as my podcast app. And, it's not my default. I don't go to it. And I just don't know why, even though I've got it on every device, everywhere.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem natural.
But I bet you'll have listened to at least one podcast in a month, even if it's just Spotify throwing one at you in the middle of a automated playlist. And so they will still count you as a monthly user in terms of using podcasts on the platform. And I think that's the thing. That's where this weird set of numbers appears from. Is that it's just basically based on the fact that if Spotify serves you one podcast in the month, then it can count you as a podcast user.
Nice trick if you can do it. Okay, well, let's move on. That part of, let's give it some due. That part was part of that report was from Edison Research, wasn't it? Their share of ear. They've also said, James, that friend of the show, Gabriel Soto, unveiled demographic breakdowns for podcast listeners. He said boomers are less familiar with podcasting and listen far less, but 91% have a smartphone. So there's an opportunity there. What was he talking about?
Yeah, there's a massive opportunity both in boomers, so old folk, but in Gen Alpha as well, in the really young people as well. They're really young. They're younger than Gen Z. We've
gone the full car number plate round, haven't we?
I know, exactly. It's all a little bit ridiculous. But yes, so there's real opportunity with both boomers and Gen Alpha if we want to grow the amount of listeners to podcasts. Now, I will now boringly say that I'm less interested in the number of listeners and more interested in time spent listening. And that's the thing that I am most excited by these days, and really don't care too much about seeing that random 43% number increase. I would much rather focus on the amount of time that we're spending. But a great piece from Gabriel Soto at Podcast Movement, and it's really good to end up seeing him. And other folk at Podcast Movement were the good folk from Evergreen Podcasts, who appears to have acquired a slate of music podcasts from Sound Talent Media. I'm always interested when companies acquire a slate of music podcasts rather than acquiring the company. Which tends to me to point to the same thing that's going on with Live One and Cast Media. They've acquired certain assets of, but not acquiring the actual company itself. Even so, combined with the Cyrus Media stuff that they look for, Evergreen's music podcasts is now 55 music podcasts, and they're reaching 500,000 monthly listeners, which is a good thing. They are also, I understand, a investor into podcast radio, which announced that it was going to be available in a number of different US markets in the next couple of weeks. We don't know which US markets podcast radio is going to be available in, but it's going to be interesting seeing where they end up launching and whether or not podcasting works on the radio, because we don't really have a ton of good numbers in terms of that.
When I saw this story, first of all, I thought, Evergreen, really good company. They sponsored my podcast festival many, many years ago, and thank you for doing that. And it's good to see they're supporting other companies. I thought 55 music podcasts. I thought, Jesus, after Boost Scramble, someone's gone mental and created 55 new shows. So I thought, wow, I better go and check this out. And of course, it is 55 shows that talk about music rather than music shows, which I think is a slightly different angle. And but when I ingested those into Podfans, because I thought, this is great, and I thought, wow, if these guys, and I bet they haven't heard about your show, James, and Adam's show, but if they had and they understand it, these shows that talk about albums and talk about specific genres of music, wow, they can start to look at including real music within their shows, because it's only talking about the music rather than talking about the music and playing the music. Yeah. And I thought, here's an opportunity.
Well, yes, maybe there is an opportunity there, although, of course, right now, the songs that are available for you to play like that, nobody's heard of. So, you kind of get, I guess, a little bit of that. But there's certainly some, opportunity, I think, in the future. I mean, of course, we've all heard this song. Yes, we've all heard that song because, of course, it's still number one, I would imagine, on the Wave Lake Top 40.
Not for long.
That song, I know, but I would imagine that there's not going to be a whole lot of other songs like that, but who knows?
Well, we'll find out because she's on the show next week.
Is she really? There you
Yes.
go. That's a good booking, Mr. Sethi.
Thank you very much.
Many congratulations. I'm looking forward to that. Let's go around the world. Taipei, the number of people listening to podcasts has reached half of radio's audience, which sounds good, except 17% of adults listen to the radio in the country, so half of radio's audience isn't actually as much as it could be. Guangjin Yo, who I'm actually meeting next week, who is Podnews' Asia correspondent, he tells me that Taipei is very, very YouTube heavy, really, really strongly YouTube heavy, and so that may be a thing to be said for that. And Podimo is celebrating a year existing in Finland. The premium podcast and audiobook subscription service has so far enabled more than 30 podcasters to turn professional, which is a good thing.
Oh. Now, moving on, jobs. James, tell me more. Who's moving? Who's grooving?
Well, John W. Gibbons, I bumped into him at Podcast Movement last week. He has been appointed to the board of directors at Libsyn. Now, he was made interim CEO only last month and chief product officer. You would assume that he would be put onto the board of directors at the same time, but no. So there we are. Not quite sure why.
Has he got enough hats?
I know. I know.
Spread the love, John. Spread the love. Give the jobs to a few other people.
Exactly. One of the interesting things that he was saying is that he is seriously considering changing the name of the company to Liberated Syndication, because that's what Libsyn stands for. And Liberated Syndication does what it says on the tin. It's open, it's, et cetera, and everything else. I would imagine that won't mean that the Libsyn brand changes. But I rather like the fact that they might make a little bit more of the Liberated Syndication name. Good to bump into him, and good to bump into Chuck, who is their new CFO.
Well, I was going to say before, thankfully, hopefully John's not taking head of marketing, because I don't like that name at all.
Well, it was good to bump into those two. Chuck was a good person to meet, who's their new CFO, but has no background in the podcasting world, and so I think he was finding the whole podcast movement a little bit bewildering. But I'm sure that he enjoyed that. Good news for fans of great people: Stacy Goers has been hired as senior manager of product for Apple Podcasts. She used to work for Acast, before that used to work for NPR. She started last week. She's moving to Cupertino in Q4 after she takes some time for maternity leave. So more good news for the Goers household. And she is, I think, very good news for Apple. As I understand it, and I don't think Ben Cave will thank me for saying this, but as I understand it, the senior manager of product for Apple Podcasts is the person with the power. Ben, from everything that I understand, has the power in terms of editorial, but not the power in terms of technology. And the fact that Stacy has spent some time understanding the new podcast namespace, understanding podcasting 2.0, is very good news for Apple. So it's a very good hiring, I think, for Stacy. Have we had her on the show, Sam? I think we have, haven't we?
No, I don't think we have. I'm going to reach out to her, but obviously she's on maternity leave.
Well, obviously, A, she's on maternity leave, and B, she now works at Apple Podcasts, and therefore can't say a thing to anybody about anything.
Persona non grata, yes.
But there we are. I did bump into some of my friends at Apple at Podcast Movement, and they were very friendly and jolly, although did not buy me a beer or bring me a new iPhone. So still, there you go.
It's a bit like the BBC, James. When you join Apple, you have to leave your opinion in a corner and never have one.
Except I would imagine that Apple is at least slightly more competent. John Gibbs is a former Spotify data scientist, and he has joined Veritonic as a strategic advisor, which is always interesting to end up seeing. And Dominic Milano, I used to work with Dominic many years ago at Triton Digital. He has since worked for Target Spot, which has a fancy new name that I've completely forgotten, so I'm going to call them Target Target Spot, and he has joined Katz Media Group, or rather rejoined Katz Media Group as Senior Vice President, Sales Director and Programmatic Audio Lead. He's most definitely a giant in the audio ad tech world, so good to see him.
And he's got a giant business card if he's getting that title on it as well.
Exactly. SVP, SD, and Programmatic Audio Lead. I'm not sure that you can have PAL. But if you're looking for a job, Podnews has podcasting jobs across the industry and across the world. It's podcasting's largest jobs board, and they're free to post as well. It just takes 2 minutes. podnews.net/jobs.
The tech stuff on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Yes, it's the stuff you'll find every Monday in the Podnews newsletter. Here's where we do all of the tech talk. And what tech stuff do you have for us today, Mr. Sethi?
Well, one of the new services that's launched is called transcribe.fm. It's been launched by Nathan Gathright. It's launched as a lightning-fast transcription service. So I was really curious about this. So I spoke to Nathan. Now, look, before we do, what it is he allows you to go to the site, a very simple UI, log in with your Olby wallet, and then upload your audio, and then boom, it'll give you a price for transcribing that audio. You pay it from your digital wallet using Satoshis, and guess what? You then get your transcription back in JSON or SRT, TXT, VTT. So yeah, it's a really simple service. But one thing he's done, James, that's really, really cool. He's using this new protocol called L402. And what it does is it produces a Bolt 11 invoice. So technically, it's the first time that an API can be used as a service in this way and automated. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And so we reached out to Nathan and said, look, tell me more. What is transcribe.fm and why did you build it?
Transcribe.fm is a lightning-fast transcription service for podcasters that lets users pay for transcription with their Lightning wallet, and developers can take advantage of our L402 API to offer transcription in their own apps.
Okay, let's unpack all that. That's a lot to unpack. Step back a second. So the first thing is you've created a platform that allows podcasters to get a transcription, as you say, lightning fast, but it's a transcription. Are you using, like everyone else, Open Whisper APIs, or are you doing something else?
Yeah, I'm doing something else. I was really inspired by Fountain's approach to transcription, and I sort of wanted to offer that as a service within my own apps and for other people.
Okay, so that's great. You mentioned something called L402. What is L402?
Yeah, L402 is a standard for charging for services over the Lightning Network. For developers like me, this eliminates many of the headaches with running a paid API. I don't have to convince users to sign up with a credit card. I don't have to worry about credit card processing fees. I don't have to manage recurring usage-based billing. So there's lots of advantages that really made this project viable.
So the question is, how much does it cost? How long is a piece of string? How long's the cost of the transcription? I mean, is it per minute? And that's the cost charging model. How does it work?
Yeah. So every time a user makes an API request, Transcribe.fm responds with a Lightning invoice based on the duration of the audio. With a paid invoice, they can repeat that same request and get their audio transcribed and download it in their preferred formats. So it costs whatever my own costs are with my transcription provider, converted into sats so that users can pay with Satoshi.
Okay. So can you, or does it allow for things like splits in there? Now, the reason I ask is because it talks about third-party developers using your API. So let's say there's an app that wants to use your API to offer their clients a transcription service, which is what you want to do. They click a button. It says, oh, this is going to cost you 10,000 sats, random number. What do you take from that? Do you take just the full 10,000? But if you're the app developer, you're sending a customer to transcribe.fm. So, of course, you want a little kick in there as well. It's all value for value. So in the workflow, is there a way of setting in splits?
Yeah, unfortunately, This is all based on Bolt 11 invoices and not key send payments. So with key send payments, we would be able to offer splits, but the L402 spec is all centered around Bolt 11 invoices. So if a developer wants to add on a cut for themselves before paying transcribe.fm, they can present, their own invoice to their users and maybe do a key send payment at that point, but then the L402 API needs to be fully paid to transcribe.fm.
Okay, I can see a way of doing that. Yeah, I guess the other way could be that you create an affiliate link fee. I mean, that 17 transcriptions that come from app X, so you could do it in real time or later.
Yeah, no, I think that's something definitely worth exploring, but it's early days yet.
So you mentioned something called Bolt 11. Tell me what's Bolt 11.
So yeah, Bolt 11 is just the sort of standard Lightning invoice that requires all the required information really is an amount for the invoice and who the recipient is. So every time an API request is made, I generate a Bolt 11 invoice without really having to know too much about who is requesting that transcript. So that can be another service. It can be a web LN wallet can pay that invoice. And once that invoice is paid, a code called a pre-image is revealed, and that is used to sort of provide proof of payment and actually get your transcript.
Right. And when they get the transcript, what formats do they get them back in?
Yeah, so we support all of the Podcasting 2.0 formats. Especially my favorite is JSON, because I really appreciate word-by-word fidelity. That really comes into play in steno.fm for the sort of karaoke style highlighting you can see there. But we also provide it in SRT, VTT, and TXT files.
Okay. So the JSON format's the one we use as well within Podfans, and I think many have started using that. As you said, it's the karaoke style playback. And of course, as people are starting to add music lyrics as well as just standard, is there a way, and this is just something thinking outside the box, of having a automated repeat function? So the worst thing in the world would be this, right? I record a new episode and then I have to go into my admin dashboard and click send me a new transcript every time, right? Because I might just forget. Is there a way that you can say, as soon as a new episode drops, send me an invoice gets paid, send me a transcript, so you can automate it?
Yeah, that's definitely something I'm looking into. It would either require transcribe.fm to monitor your RSS feed for new episodes, or the host to integrate that functionality before publishing so that they could just send that audio URL to transcribe.fm, get the transcript, and include it in the RSS feed before the episode gets published.
You could do a Podping notification even.
Yeah, I've been talking to at least one host about an integration, as well as Stephen B integrating it with Sovereign Feeds.
Yeah, I think the natural place that this should sit is with hosts. Right? That's where I would see it. But you mentioned Fountain and Oscar, and they've implemented a transcription capability into Fountain, which is not host-driven. This is a podcaster who's claimed their podcast in Fountain can now choose to get a transcription added to their episode, which is what you're talking about here as well.
Yeah, well, the great thing about Fountain is that also listeners can also request the transcript. It doesn't have to be a burden on the podcaster themselves. The listener can request the transcript, and it would end up propagating to all listeners in the Fountain app. So I think that's a really great model. I'd love to see those transcripts make their way back to the host so that those transcripts would then be made available outside of Fountain. But we're going to need some new developments in the podcast namespace or some other sort of relationships with hosts before we see something like that.
Yeah, because you'd have to update the RSS feed, wouldn't you, bidirectionally? That's the challenge. You'd have to export a updated RSS into a host to then ingest the new RSS before it would then serve that transcript. Or you just send them the transcript, I guess.
Yeah, so if we eventually get webhooks in RSS feeds, I'd love to see different third parties providing their transcripts back to the podcaster sort of as a public service.
One other way, just playing devil's advocate, is we're waiting on something called Podcast Verify, which is a Phase 7 tag. Because of the removal of email from RSS feeds by many hosts, it means that it makes it very difficult for podcast app providers to verify a claim to a podcast, because normally you would email them, go, hey, is this your email? Verify it's your email. Bang, it's your podcast, right? It's the email in your RSS. But if there isn't one, you can't do it. You can, but most average users are not going to go and find the hidden feature in their host that re-enables it and wait for a popping. Just not happening. So Podcast Verify, if it ever comes to light, is like an OAuth type verification. I click a button, it looks at a unique identity string that goes to the host where it's hosted, and then the user verifies and the claim's made. It could be in that same process, though, that you could, once you know who the host is, if the transcription's made available, you could have the app just automatically send the transcription back to the host. Once you know the verified host, that's the thing.
Yeah, knowing the host is maybe easy for a vast majority of shows, but for every self-hosted show out there, there's, a million edge cases to worry about. So there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. But I'm looking forward to seeing something like the events or webhook or whatever endpoint it is that actually provides access for third parties to make API requests back to the host. I'm really looking forward to that. Whether or not it is the user at the other end is the podcaster or not, I think Podcast Verify is great for when you are wanting to confirm ownership or take some action on behalf of the podcast as the podcaster. For transcripts, I really want to see that democratized further than just the podcaster, so that if listeners are willing to front the sats or whatever the payment method is, that listeners can become a part of that, providing value back to the podcaster.
Yeah, I mean, I've just talked to Cameron about listeners paying for hosting, in effect, by paying as a split on the IPFS network. So it could be that listeners pay for it. I could see that. I suspect it's going to be mainly podcasters to begin with, but then it could be down to your fans to do that, I guess.
Yeah, I think we've seen, the past couple decades, we've heard accessibility advocates make the case for transcripts for podcasts, and unfortunately, it has not caught on en masse. So I'd love to be able to see people put their money where their mouth is about caring about transcripts and making them available to other people when it's even when the podcaster isn't fully convinced.
Two more questions quickly. One is, will you ever provide a service like Tag Clouds?
Tag Clouds? Yeah, I'm definitely looking into generative AI tech to add on top of the transcripts, like auto chapters and things like that. It already does speaker diarization. It can't identify who they are, so a user would need to go in and relabel their speakers because they're just flat files at the end of the day. But tag clouds, things like that, keywords, chapters, highlights, all of that stuff is really interesting, and I'd love to see what is actually viable and customers are interested in.
And then the last one is, how easy is it for other API providers to implement L402? How hard was it for you to do?
Oh, it was rather easy once I wrapped my head around the process, just the back and forth nature of making multiple API requests to fulfill, one outcome was a little bit to wrap my head around that and the macaroons system. But I did it as part of a hackathon. Albie encouraged me to submit Transcribe FM to a AI for all hackathon. And so I implemented L402 as part of my proposal, and it was a great sort of like week-long project.
Can't wait to try it. I have gone on to the site. I've connected my Orbi account. I'm going to upload a couple of transcripts and see what comes back. So, hey, Nathan, thank you for doing this. It's a really cool feature you've implemented.
Thank you.
So, Nathan, where can people go to find out more about your service?
Yeah, you can visit the website transcribe.fm and give it a test run for yourself.
And if they need to get a hold of you, where's the best place to find you these days?
Yeah, you can find me on Mastodon. Just search hello@nathangathright.com and I'll come up.
Excellent. Nathan, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Nathan Gathright, he's a very clever man and also produces some very beautiful websites as well. What I love about transcribe.fm, and Steno FM is one of his as well, is that it looks properly good. He's clearly very good on the design and everything else. One day, perhaps, I might send him a quick email to see if he might give the Podnews website a spruce of, a new lick of paint. That would be a good thing, perhaps.
Indeed.
Yes. Descript bought Squadcast, of course, as you will have heard in this very podcast a couple of weeks ago, and remote recording tool Riverside has enhanced its editor in its latest release. It's got all kinds of smart things in there, text-based editing, intros and outros, all of that kind of stuff. So that's all fancy do. We used to use Riverside for this very podcast. This week we're trying CleanFeed, partially because Adam Curry and Dave Jones particularly were saying that the audio quality of this show was not as it should be. So tell us what the audio quality of this show is this week. See if you can spot any difference whatsoever. That would be kind. You can send us a boost with that. And Descript are forcing people onto the new version of Descript, are they?
Yeah, coming October the 1st, they will be moving all the projects that were on the classic, as they called it, over to the new Descript. You don't have to do anything. It will automatically move those classic projects for you. And all your data will go along, including your files, comments, and version history. So, yep, goodbye to the classic, which I know many people still love and use, because the new version, sadly, is a little bit sort of minimalist, trying to find features. Where did that go? How do you get that to work? Still doesn't become that obvious to most people. Certainly from people like me. Matt Medeiros, I know, speaking to him, was like, oh, don't like the new version. So, but it's goodbye, old version. You better get used to it.
Yes. Oh, well, there you go. Yes, I haven't used Descript for a while, and perhaps I should give it a go, or who knows, perhaps I possibly shouldn't. Albi has launched a developer wallet if you want to get down and dirty, as Nathan did. They've also launched a PWA client, a fancy web thing that you can open on your phone, and it looks and works just like an app, which is nice. And they're not the only people, are they, Sam?
No, Oscar, friend of the show from Fountain, they've launched a new PWA. I don't think they've officially launched it. It's a soft launch, a bit like the Albi one. But when you look around now in the industry, you've got Podverse, Podfriend. They're also PWAs, progressive web apps. And I can say to you now, Podfans will launch its PWA, strangely, before the 27th of September, James.
Oh, well, there's a thing. The 27th of September is going to be an interesting time for launches, I think. Because I suspect that we will see at least one other launch on the 27th of September. Not going to tell you what it is. You'll just have to wait and find out.
Oh, good.
Yeah, but that should be fun, I think.
Good.
Also rolling out, Podcastle has launched what it calls the first real-time collaborative podcasting platform. It isn't. You can now...
I didn't think it was.
Oh, yeah. You can now work on the same project simultaneously, like you've been able to do in Descript and other tools. But Podcastle does look very cool and very smart, and there's clearly some very clever techies working on there, which is nice. And two other things here. Snipped, which is a podcast app, they are adding AI episodes, summaries and transcripts, which is all very fancy. It's a paid-for thing, Snipped Premium. And there's a thing called Revive. And Revive is quite clever. It calls itself a groundbreaking generative AI audio enhancement tool. And basically, you can record anywhere and it will make you sound as if you're in a proper studio. Let's have a quick listen to what it sounds like.
Imagine that every microphone from any device recorded in any environment instantly sounded like it was recorded and mixed by a professional sound engineer.
That's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Impressive. Yeah.
Imagine if something that you're recording all of a sudden sounds as if you're holding your nose. And that's a little bit of what it sounds like. But it is very, very impressive. It sounds very similar to Adobe's enhancement services that we've actually used on this show before. So that's a smart thing.
Now, friend of the show, RSS Blue, launched something quietly yesterday as well. They're calling all music podcasters and audio enthusiasts. They're rolling out a special pricing for shorter episodes. I thought that was really interesting that they're going to charge a little bit less if you upload songs, albums, or bite-sized pieces of content. So yeah, one regular episode is equivalent to 3 short episodes. So again, I think it's interesting as we start to look beyond just audio podcasting, because obviously music podcasting is now becoming a thing. And yeah, well done to the guys at RSS Blue.
Yes, well done to them. I think that's very smart.
Last couple of things then, James. Just a couple of proposals that are going off, and I think just people should be flagged. Alec Gates has proposed a new radio medium in the podcast namespace. I think that's really interesting. It's the idea, again, of being able to set in the live item tag a continuous time rather than a start and an end time. And then in the medium tag itself, you tag it radio. And I think this could be a really good way, again, as we start to look at more live and we start to look at more other formats, not just podcasting, for where RSS could be used. I think there was a quote from the interview we did a couple of weeks back. He said, one of the things that people have not got used to yet or not got into their heads is that RSS is now a live data transport layer. And he's pushing very heavily on that aspect of RSS. And I thought, wow, actually, I hadn't thought about how much more we are pushing towards a live medium in the web, and RSS is going to be the transport layer for doing that.
Yeah, I think it's RSS could well be quite interesting in terms of radio stations, certainly, and it's something that I'll be talking about when I'm at Radio Days Asia next week. So yes, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Also interesting to see how at some cross-app comments. Do you remember that when we were all getting very excited about cross-app comments and we're still waiting for them?
Can I just say I never got excited about it, but that's fine.
Well, there's another idea. Hooray! Although thankfully it doesn't mean any more work. Lemmy, which is a alternative to Reddit. That's basically uses ActivityPub, and if it had something very tedious called a replies collection API, it would enable that to work very well with cross-app comments in the existing standard. So there is somebody who is taking a look at seeing whether or not they can get that API call into the Lemmy app, and in which case then that would be a good thing for cross-app comments to podcasting. It would make an awful lot of sense. Thank you to John Spurlock for pushing that forward. I'm still a little bit dubious about cross-app comments, the way that it's been specified, because I think it's been specified for large shows, really, more than smaller ones.
Yeah, James, you said Podnews' RSS feed supports the social interact tag through the ActivityPub, but if you wanted your opinion, you'd like it enabled on the channel level, at the show level, as an option rather than the individual episodes. Can you explain what you mean?
Yes, so I was basically thinking that if the majority of shows have fewer than 50 downloads, which they do, then actually it doesn't make much sense to splinter all of the comments that you get from your podcast into each individual episode. What many podcasters would probably want to do is to have one space for all of the comments about a particular podcast until it reaches a certain size, of course, but all comments for a particular podcast on the show level rather than on each individual episode level. And I think that would be rather more interesting to many podcasters who aren't the size of, No Agenda or Podcasting 2.0 or any of those larger shows. I think that would be rather more interesting. After all, nobody wants to go into a pub which is virtually empty. You always want to go into a pub which has, some other nice, interesting people in there. And so that's what I'd like to see. But who knows? Well,
actually, strangely, if you look at Fountain and at Podfans, that we both, Oscar and I, have an activity tab that exists at the show level.
There you go.
And that activity shows not just only comments, but also other activity. If somebody followed you or if somebody shared your episode or whatever, and it's all at the show level. And I think there was a proposal for something called podcast events, which John Spurlock was interested in doing. And I think actually those event triggers could include comments as one of those event triggers, right?
Yeah.
So, but also other things. So that may be the way forward as opposed to using the social interactive.
Indeed. I mean, there are 400 million different alternative ways of doing comments. So it's delightful that we're now seeing another one. Oscar Merry has proposed using Nostr as a cross-app commenting system. The idea is that, of course, we already know who you are from a person point of view, because we know that you're logged into a Bitcoin wallet. So therefore you can use Nostr with that. And the idea is that then automatically works through Nostr and through relays and all of that kind of stuff. So it's another London bus thing. We now have 7 competing cross-app commenting systems, and it'll be lovely if one of those gets implemented by more than one set of people, I guess.
Well, I looked at that proposal from Oscar and I said, look, I'll put my hand up and I'll implement what we agree as a community upon. And I think, Olby, for example, does allow you to have your npub within the API. So we support the npub, the public identity for your Nostr account. We don't have the private one, obviously. So we can share via, gosh, I hate these things, but NIP01 straight into Nostr already today, as an example. But and of course, Nostr is using sats. That's the reason why everyone's going down this road, because then you can link sats and boosts and everything else can be, still in that payment system, as opposed to ActivityPub, which doesn't do any of that, which is why I think Oscar's looking that way. But again, one thing I'd say, we already have this, James? We do Boostergram Corner, right? And we get comments from numerous apps into one place. Yes. Don't we already have cross-app comments?
Yes. And of course, we also have the benefit that those cross-app comments come with money attached to them as well. Nearly said small amounts of money there. I held back. Yes, it's some of it is all a bit tedious, but still, there we are. One final thing just to mention is that Stitcher, God bless its soul, it was turned off yesterday and no longer works as an app. If you're wondering which podcast app to choose next, and you are using Stitcher as an app, which is a very important thing to say, then there is a long piece in Podnews recommending individual apps for that. You will find not very many Podcasting 2.0 apps, because as a replacement to Stitcher, they're probably not the right place yet, but I'm sure that they will be. Worthwhile taking a look at that in any case. Let's dive into some events and some awards. The big event that I'm getting ready for next week is Podcast Day Asia, which is part of Radio Days Asia in Kuala Lumpur, which should be good fun. And then, of course, Podnews Live in London on the 27th of September. Tickets are still available for that, podnews.net/live. The early bird ticket price has gone, but that's okay. It's still very cheap. So podnews.net/live is where to go for that. And then, of course, the British Podcast Awards are the next day. And there are more events, both paid for and free at Podnews, virtual events or events in a place with people. And if you're organising something, you can tell the world about it. It's free to be listed at podnews.net/events.
Boostergram Corner on the Podnews Weekly Review.
Oh, it's our favourite time of the week, Sam. It's Boostergram Corner. We've got a boost here from Dave Jones, who is talking about your tattoo, 21,112 sats. What does he say?
He hasn't paid enough to get the actual chapter art that shows the tattoo yet. Bit more sats, Dave, and I might do it, but no. I was joking that I had a Podnews tattoo. I wouldn't put a tattoo on my body. That's me, but there you go.
No, well, there you go. Moritz from Albi sent us a couple of different boosts. One saying, fascinating episode, thank you. And one saying, taking the friction out of payments is one of the greatest achievements of pod fans. Oh, look, you've got a fan there. Yeah.
Well, what can I say? Thank you, Moritz. Yes. That's all I'll say.
Very nice. And two things talking about the Podcast Standards Project. One from Nick, who I think is Nick Malster, 3333 Sats. Interesting discussion. First time I've heard the Podcast Standards Project mentioned since it launched.
And the last.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And then Adam Curry, 10,000 Sats. Thank you, Adam. Can we just admit that the Podcast Standards Group has pod faded? Ooh. Well, I bring news from Podcast Movement. There was a meeting of the Podcast Standards Group. Not that you would have known because they haven't told anybody about it, but nevertheless, there was a meeting of
Sorry,
that.
did they tell the people before the meeting, or did no one turn up to the meeting?
People did turn up. And I think the issue that they have is they do want more podcast hosts involved, but I think the most important thing is they need podcast apps also involved as well. One of the ideas that I put forward to one of the members of the Podcast Standards Project was that I think, frankly, they should release an app. They should get together. They've got some big podcast hosting companies involved in that. They should release a white-labeled app which offers the bits of the new podcasting namespace that they want to support, and see if they can release something which is which just begins to shake up the world of Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, and all of that kind of stuff. If you remember, Pocket Cast was supposed to have joined, but they don't appear to have joined the Podcast Standards Group yet. So not quite sure what's going on there. Has it pod faded? I'm not sure it's pod faded yet, but I think that there's definitely still conversations going on there.
How about changing the alternative view to that, James, which is don't create an app, create a fund and support the apps that are actually supporting the podcast standards?
Says the man who's made an app. Yes. I would probably, I could certainly get that too. Probably makes sense. If you do get value from what we do, the Podnews Weekly Review is separate from Podnews. Sam and I share everything from it, and we really appreciate your support so we can continue making this show. If you want to, you can become a power supporter at weekly.podnews.net. There's a bunch of people who have done that, and they're supporting us month in, month out. So they should probably get at least a little bit of a mention. Dan Lopez, Dave Jones, yes, that man again, Matt Medeiros, Marshall Brown, Cameron Moll, and Kevin Finn. Thank you all so much for your monthly support of us. That's really kind. And of course, you can support us with Sats as well by hitting the boost button in your podcast app. So what's been happening for you this week then, Sam?
Well, while you were gallivanting and drinking beer and hobnobbing with the rich and famous in Denver, I was down coding actually. We took 2 weeks to. Were
you coding or
no,
was it your coder?
No, let's be honest. I was just pontificating with him as well. Let's be clear. One wasn't rolling any sleeves up and God, if I did code, it would never work. No, none of that. No, what we did do though was we basically refactored all of our APIs while you were away to do a second tracking of Satoshis when you listen to a show. And that was important because the show that you did, the James Music Show, what did you actually call it eventually?
Oh, it was James's random music show thing.
That thing.
Yes, that's how that worked.
And Adam's show meant that the way that we were paying or tracking sats before was on a per minute basis. We couldn't then do the switch when you did it at 1 minute, 21 seconds over to a new. So we refactored all of that. We've now put that live. And I think, James, have you started to see any payments come into your dashboard?
Yes, I'm seeing a few payments coming in, as you can see. Yes, so that's a good thing. So that kind of works.
Yeah, that works. And as I said earlier, we are finishing off our PWA, so the mobile client for PodFans will be available before the 27th of September.
Very nice.
James, now what happened? Come on, spill all the gossip, the stuff that you didn't write about. What was going on in the secret corridors, apart from that podcast standards meeting?
Well, there's all kinds of things going on. I enjoyed Podcast Movement. I have to say the hotel was massive. And that had great benefits in terms of it was a decent place to be. It was a decent choice for food. The hotel didn't seem overwhelmed at all at the fact that there were 2,500 podcasters there, plus actually a number of other conferences going on at the same time too. So I was particularly impressed at the hotel. So that was a good thing. The fire alarm went off at 4:00 in the morning, but not in my wing. So I was delighted, not in the superb wing that I was in. So that was good.
So you slept through it all, is what you're saying?
I did. Well, in fact, I didn't sleep through it because, jet lag, but I was awake and blissfully unaware that there was an alarm going off. So that was the thing. But no, it's really good. As ever, there are things that I'm following up that I've heard, naughty things about from some companies, and I'm trying to understand a little bit more about what those naughty things are. But obviously can't really say an awful lot about that until I actually understand a little bit more about what the naughty things are. So there's always it's always good for new conversations and things. And it was good to meet up with some of the folks from Captivate as well, who were there and who I think, being of Scottish origin, were in the bar quite a lot. So it was good to have a chat with them.
I just remember talking about multiple events at the same time. I remember going to one of my first ever CES events in Vegas. And I thought, I'm so excited. And then I just got lost in hall after hall. But what was the funniest thing ever was talking about putting multiple ones together. Going on the vernacular to the hall, and coming the other way were the porn stars from the AVN Awards that were going on at the same week. And I thought,
yes.
How funny to get geeks and porn stars in the same area. Never knew that the two would go together.
That pretty well always happens at CES. It's one of those. It's one of those things. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, bless it. Las Vegas. Can't wait to go back there. Except I can. And that's it for this week.
Yes, you can give feedback to James and I by using email to weekly@podnews.net or send us a Boostergram, which we love. If your podcast app doesn't support Boost, then grab a new app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Yes, our music is from Studio Dragonfly. Our voiceover is Sheila D. We use Clean Feed for our main audio this week, and we're hosted and sponsored by Podnews Live and Buzzsprout. Podcast hosting made easy.
Get updated every day. Subscribe to our newsletter at podnews.net. Tell your friends and grow the show.
And support us.
The Podnews Weekly Review will return next week. Keep listening.